The sky was dark and wild, twisted with thick storm clouds that roared like a living beast. Lightning slashed across the horizon, reflecting on the silver towers of the royal city that floated high above the ground. Rain fell like shards of glass, stinging anyone caught outside. Princess Alara, the youngest daughter of King Thalric, had been inspecting the edge of the city's northern platform when the storm hit. She loved the calm mornings and quiet walks along the floating terraces, but this storm was far from calm. Her guards had been scattered by the sudden wind, thrown off balance by the gusts. Alara clutched the railing, heart hammering, as she felt the platform sway dangerously beneath her feet. One strong gust and she would be lost forever, falling through the endless sky. Panic gripped her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew fear could make her slip faster. Still, each crack of thunder and flash of lightning seemed closer. More threatening than the last dot from below, a figure appeared through the sheets of rain. Marcus, a human trader from a distant world, had been delivering rare metals to the floating city. He was not a warrior, not a trained hero, just a man who had wandered too far from his own planet. But when he saw a figure struggling on the edge of the platform, his heart did not hesitate. He ran, ignoring the stinging rain and the howling wind, every instinct screaming that he had to reach her in time. Alara barely saw him at first, only noticing the shadow moving against the lightning. And then he leapt, defying the storm, and caught her just as she slipped from the railing. The platform shuddered, but Marcus held on tightly, his arms strong despite his human frame. Alara gasped, her fear mixing with awe. His eyes, calm and focused even in the chaos, met hers. For a moment, everything else, the storm, the city, the danger, vanished. There was only him and the strange, overwhelming sense of safety he brought. "Hold on," he shouted over the roaring wind. His voice was steady, even when the world around them screamed with chaos. Alara could barely nod, too stunned to speak. She felt her feet leave the platform entirely as Marcus maneuvered, carrying her with a strength she had never seen before. Every bolt of lightning and every gust of wind threatened to push them apart, but he did not falter. His determination was almost frightening in its intensity, but comforting at the same time. Finally, they reached the inner platform, away from the edge, where the wind was slightly less violent. Marcus set her down carefully, his hands brushing against her soaked robes. Alara's chest heaved, her heart still racing, but now with relief instead of terror. She looked up at him, her hair plastered to her face, her voice trembling. You saved me," she whispered, barely audible over the storm. Marcus simply nodded, offering a small, tired smile. "I couldn't let you fall," he said simply. There was no pride in his tone, no boastfulness. Just the honesty of a human who saw danger and acted without hesitation. The guards slowly returned, stunned to see the human standing beside the princess, calm despite the storm. Whispers ran through them, some fearful, some admiring, but no one doubted the truth. A human had just risked his life for the royal heir. Princess Alara, still shaken, realized she had never felt this combination of fear and gratitude before. As the storm finally began to ease, the city seemed quieter, as if holding its breath after the chaos. And in that quiet, a bond began, fragile, new, and impossible to ignore. The human who had risked everything for her stood before her, drenched and exhausted, yet steady. And for the first time in her sheltered life, Princess Alara wondered, who was this strange man, and why had he cared enough to save her? The answer, she sensed, would change her life forever. The morning after the storm, the palace was alive with whispers. Courtiers and guards spoke in hushed tones about the human who had risked his life for Princess Alara. Some admired his courage, while others frowned, uncomfortable with an outsider gaining such attention. But none could deny the truth. Marcus had acted when no one else would. King Thalric sat in his throne room, a stern figure draped in royal blue and silver. His eyes, sharp and calculating, followed the human carefully. Marcus entered the grand hall cautiously, unsure of the customs of this alien world. He had never been in a palace before, let alone one that floated high above the clouds. Every step echoed on the marble floor, making him feel small and out of place. "You have shown great bravery," the king said finally, his deep voice filling the hall. "You acted when my guards could not. You risked your life for my daughter." Thalric leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "In this kingdom, courage is not a simple trait, it demands respect and reward." Marcus swallowed. He had never wanted reward, never dreamed of recognition. He had only acted because it was the right thing to do. I did what anyone would have done," he said, trying to sound modest. Though his voice shook slightly under the king's gaze, Thalric's eyes did not soften. Perhaps on your world. Here, the laws of my house are clear. When one saves a royal bloodline, a bond is formed. That bond is not symbolic. It is binding. Marcus, by the command of my authority, you are betrothed to Princess Alara. The words struck Marcus like lightning. He froze, feeling the weight of a life he had never imagined. Betrothed? To a princess? His mind raced. He had traveled across galaxies, faced storms, pirates, and deadly creatures, but nothing had prepared him for this. Alara, standing nearby, stared at him wide-eyed. She had only known this man for hours, yet every memory of fear, every heartbeat from the storm, returned to her. She wanted to speak, to protest, to explain that they barely knew each other, but the king's command left no room for hesitation. Your father's decision is not to be questioned. Thalric continued. You will reside here, learn our ways, and prepare for the bond that now links your lives. It is not a choice. It is duty. Marcus nodded slowly. He could feel the weight of every courtier's eyes on him, judging, whispering. He thought of his simple life on Earth, or wherever his world had been, and wondered if he would ever see it again. And yet, somewhere in the fear and confusion, a quiet determination began to grow. He had saved the princess. He had acted without thought for reward. Perhaps he could continue to act the same way, even if the world expected him to bow to rules he did not fully understand. Ilara's gaze softened. She had always known that her life was controlled by duty and protocol, but seeing Marcus stand there, confident, honest, and unafraid, awoke something inside her. Perhaps courage and loyalty could transcend worlds. Perhaps this human, foreign, and strange, was not simply a pawn of duty, but someone worth knowing, worth trusting. As the hall fell silent, the tension between command and choice filled the air. Marcus and Alara stood there, two individuals from different worlds bound by circumstance, yet not entirely unwilling. The king's decree was absolute, but the hearts of those involved remained uncharted. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. I accept your command. Not out of fear, but because I will stand by Princess Alara. A murmur ran through the court. Ilara's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, fear melted into gratitude. Perhaps the human's courage had brought more than survival. Perhaps it had brought the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. And as the palace walls seemed to hum with the weight of the decree, a new journey began. One of duty, yes, but also of trust, respect, and the fragile, growing possibility of friendship, or even something deeper. Between a princess and the human who had dared to save her life, the days after the king's decree were strange for both Marcus and Princess Alara. Marcus had never lived in a palace before. The halls were endless. Polished floors reflected light in confusing ways, and every door seemed to lead somewhere new. Servants bowed to him, nobles whispered behind their hands, and strange customs made his head spin. He stumbled through introductions, trying to learn names and rules, but it was clear he did not belong. Alara watched him with quiet amusement. She had expected fear or stiffness from the human, but instead, he moved with a strange determination. Even when he tripped over a ceremonial rug or mispronounced the name of a minor lord, he apologized politely and smiled, refusing to hide his mistakes. It was unlike anything she had seen in her court, where every error was met with scorn. One afternoon, they walked together through the palace gardens. Rain had left the flowers sparkling, and the sky was pale, soft, and calm. Marcus paused by a small fountain, watching water ripple over carved stones. Alara followed his gaze silently. I'm not used to all this, Marcus said finally, his voice low. All these rules, titles, and ceremonies. It's different from my world. Alara nodded. It is our life, she said. Everything here is planned. Every word, every step, every glance has meaning. She studied him for a moment. You don't seem afraid of making mistakes. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. I've made plenty. But I've learned that standing still out of fear doesn't help anyone. You might fall if no one acts. Her heart softened. In those words, she heard honesty, courage, and humility all at once. She had grown up surrounded by people who followed rules without thinking. Yet here was a human who risked everything for her safety, without expectation of reward. As they walked, Marcus stumbled again, this time tripping over a low garden wall. Alara reached out instinctively, catching his arm. They laughed quietly, sharing a moment that was neither royal nor formal, just human. For the first time, she felt a flicker of warmth, a tiny spark of connection that had nothing to do with duty or decree. Yet not all moments were calm. Some nobles viewed Marcus with suspicion, whispering about the dangers of a human in the royal line. Ilara heard the murmurs and felt anger rise within her. How dare they judge someone who had saved her life? She wanted to defend him, to tell the court that courage and loyalty mattered more than birth or tradition. But the rules of the palace were clear, and she had to tread carefully. That evening, they shared a quiet meal together, away from the formal tables of the court. Marcus spoke of Earth, of its endless oceans and green forests, of strange foods and simple people who lived by honesty rather than law. Ilara listened, fascinated. She had never imagined worlds so different from her own. Yet in his stories, she found a courage and simplicity that resonated deep within her. "You're not afraid to speak your mind," she said softly, almost shyly. "I speak what I feel," Marcus replied. "And I feel that people deserve to be protected, no matter what rules say. Even you." Her chest tightened. It was strange, this human who had been with her only for hours, but seemed to understand something essential about life. For the first time, she wondered if her father's decree had brought more than duty. It had brought someone who could teach her about bravery, about trust, and about choice. As night fell, the palace lights glimmered in the distance, and Marcus sat quietly beside her on the garden bench. Neither spoke for a long while, but in the silence, a fragile bond began to grow. Two very different worlds connected not by law, but by respect and an unspoken understanding that each could rely on the other. The storm that had brought them together had passed, but its echo remained, leaving a promise that their lives would never be simple again. And for the first time, Ilara felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this human could be more than a protector. He could be a part of her world, and perhaps of her heart. The palace had grown accustomed to Marcus's presence, though not all eyes watched him with favor. Whispers ran through the halls, nobles murmuring that a human could never understand the ways of their world. Some even suggested he was a danger, a reckless outsider. Ilara heard the whispers, but she only thought of his courage, the way he had risked everything to save her life. That thought brought her comfort, even in the midst of unease. One quiet evening, while the palace slept under a crescent moon, Ilara walked through the long shadowed corridors toward the library. Marcus had insisted on accompanying her, arguing that he could not leave her alone, not when danger still lingered in unseen corners. She had protested, insisting she was capable, but the human's resolve had been firm. "No," he had said simply. "I am here because I want to keep you safe." As they approached the library doors, a sudden movement caught Marcus's eye. A figure, masked and cloaked in black, was slipping toward the princess, dagger in hand. Marcus reacted instantly. He grabbed Ilara and pushed her behind a pillar, shielding her body with his own. The intruder lunged, but Marcus had anticipated the move. Using a sharp elbow and a swift motion, he knocked the dagger aside and wrestled the shadow to the floor. Ilara's breath came fast. Her heart raced not just from fear, but from the sight of Marcus, fearless and determined, protecting her without hesitation. How can you stay so calm?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus looked up at her, eyes steady even in the dim light. "When someone's life is in danger, fear doesn't help. Only action matters." His tone was simple, almost matter-of-fact, yet it carried a weight that made her chest ache with admiration. The palace guards arrived moments later, alerted by the noise. They subdued the intruder and quickly restrained him, murmuring in shock and awe at how a human had handled what would have been a deadly threat for most. Ilara stayed close to Marcus, feeling warmth spread through her chest. He had saved her again, not because he had to, but because he chose to. After the intruder was taken away, the two of them returned to the royal gardens, still shaking from the encounter. Ilara finally allowed herself a small laugh, a mix of relief and wonder. You didn't hesitate at all," she said softly. "I didn't have time," Marcus replied simply. "I just acted." The simplicity of his words struck her. Everything about this human seemed so different from the nobles of her court. They spoke in riddles, plotted endlessly, and measured courage by rank and appearance. Marcus measured courage by the only standard that mattered, protecting others. As they walked in silence, the wind whispered through the garden trees, carrying with it the scent of night flowers. Ilara felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and something unfamiliar, a spark of trust, growing stronger with every heartbeat. She realized that Marcus's bravery was not just in his actions, but in his very being. His courage, humility, and instinct to protect made him extraordinary. That night, as the palace slept and the city floated silently beneath a starry sky, Ilara found herself thinking of the human at her side. She had never imagined that someone so different from her world could feel so vital, so necessary. And though shadows of danger lingered, she felt safer than she ever had. Knowing Marcus would act without hesitation, the storm that had brought them together had faded. But new challenges were forming, hidden in the corners of the palace. Ilara knew that as long as Marcus was near, she could face them. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope not only for her safety, but for a bond that might grow stronger than duty. Stronger than law, stronger than fear itself. The palace halls, once so full of life and ceremony, now felt heavy with whispers and stares. Marcus moved carefully through them, aware that not everyone welcomed a human among the royal family. Some nobles muttered behind fans and cloaks, calling him reckless, unworthy, even dangerous. They could not understand a human's courage, nor could they accept someone who had earned the princess's trust without titles or lineage. Ilara noticed the tension immediately. It stung to hear others question Marcus, to see their skepticism and quiet disdain. She had never liked court politics, but now it made her angry. She wanted to defend him, to shout to the nobles that courage was more important than rank, that loyalty mattered more than bloodlines. But she knew better anger would only make the situation worse. Instead, she stayed close to Marcus, walking beside him in silence as they traversed the palace corridors. That evening, the princess invited him to join her in the private garden. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated the stone paths and blooming flowers, giving the place a magical calm. Ilara turned to Marcus, her expression conflicted. "I don't want this to be only duty," she said, voice low. "If this betrothal feels wrong to you, I'll understand. You could leave and I wouldn't hold it against you." Marcus paused, looking down at her with steady eyes. For a moment, the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then he spoke, simple and honest. "I'm not leaving. I don't know your world, but I know courage when I see it. And you deserve someone who will stand by you, no matter the danger." Her heart fluttered at his words. She had not expected such clarity, such certainty, especially from someone who had only been in her life for a short time. His resolve was unshakable, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that surrounded her in the court. In that moment, the weight of royal expectation seemed to lift. Replaced by something warmer, something human, they walked together among the flowers, their hands brushing occasionally, small sparks of connection passing between them. Marcus spoke of his travels across distant worlds, of storms he had faced, of people who had relied on him and taught him lessons of loyalty, courage, and hope. Ilara listened intently, fascinated by a life so different from her own, yet somehow guided by the same principles she valued. "You always act without fear," she said softly. Almost in awe. "I act because someone matters," Marcus replied. "Because it's right. Not for titles, not for reward, but because I can. Because I have to." Ilara felt her chest tighten. There was honesty in his words she had never heard in the palace before. No pretense, no calculation, only truth. And for the first time, she wondered if this human, so far from her world, could teach her more than she could ever learn from her tutors or courtiers. Perhaps courage, loyalty, and trust could be found in the most unlikely places, yet the court remained a threat. Whispers grew louder, nobles scheming in shadows, jealous of the bond forming between princess and human. But in Marcus's presence, Ilara found a strength she had never known. She realized that courage could be contagious, that the bravery of one person could inspire another, even in a world ruled by strict laws and expectations. As night settled over the palace, the two of them stood on a balcony overlooking the glowing city below. The wind carried the scent of flowers and the quiet hum of distant voices. Ilara felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and something more, something fragile and new, yet undeniable. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that this human could be more than a protector, more than a stranger. Hope that courage, loyalty, and honesty could transcend duty and law. And perhaps, one day, that hope might grow into something even stronger, a bond chosen by heart. Not decree. The city shimmered with life as the Festival of Bonds began. A celebration of courage, loyalty, and alliances across the floating towers. Lanterns floated in the evening sky like stars fallen to earth, and music drifted through the streets, mingling with laughter and applause. Marcus walked beside Ilara, his hands slightly trembling under the weight of the ceremonial robes he had been given. They were stiff and heavy, adorned with silver embroidery and completely unlike the clothes he was used to. Yet he carried himself with quiet dignity. Aware that tonight would test more than his courage, it would test his heart. Ilara, in a gown of soft azure that shimmered in the lantern light, looked at him with curiosity and pride. The human had grown accustomed to her world quickly, yet there was still a raw honesty in his gaze that fascinated her. He did not move with practiced grace or knowledge of court etiquette, but he moved with purpose, with courage. And that was more compelling than any polished noble could ever be. As the ceremony began, nobles from across the city gathered in the grand plaza. Eyes, some skeptical, some curious, were fixed on Marcus. He noticed them, felt their whispers prick his skin, but he did not falter. He had learned over the past weeks that fear and judgment were obstacles, not chains. He had faced storms, attackers, and death. This was merely another challenge. Suddenly, chaos erupted. A young child, chasing a floating lantern, slipped near the edge of a platform. The crowd gasped as the child teetered dangerously, the lantern drifting away into the night. Marcus acted instinctively. Before anyone could react, he lunged, catching the child in his arms, holding him steady until the guards could arrive. The plaza erupted into applause, not for the ceremony, but for the bravery of the human who had saved a life without hesitation. Ilara's chest swelled with admiration and relief. She had witnessed Marcus's courage before, in storms and in darkness, but seeing him act in the midst of celebration, with the eyes of the entire city upon him, made her heart beat faster. He was fearless not because he sought glory, but because protecting others was instinctive to him. The nobles, who had once whispered against him, now nodded with respect, some even bowing slightly. Marcus simply handed the child back to his parents, brushing off their gratitude with a quiet humility. He returned to Ilara's side, his robes soaked with sweat and his hair damp from the rush. "You," Ilara said, voice soft, "you don't think twice. You just do what is right." He met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "I do what I must, always." For a long moment, the sounds of music and celebration faded around them. There was only Marcus, steady and true, and Ilara, realizing that her feelings were no longer simply respect or gratitude. She trusted him completely, admired him deeply, and for the first time, considered that this human could become something far more than a protector. As the festival continued, the human and the princess moved among the lanterns, hand in hand, quietly observing the joy around them. The crowd saw a bond forming, undeniable and strong, between two very different worlds. For Ilara, it was more than admiration, it was hope. Hope that courage, honesty, and loyalty could bridge the gap between their lives. Hope that the human she had come to trust might also hold a place in her heart. When the night ended, lanterns still drifting across the sky, Ilara stood beside Marcus, feeling safer and more certain than ever before. She realized that the Festival of Bonds had done more than honor alliances. It had revealed the true strength of the human who had saved her life. And in that revelation, she knew that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, not out of duty, but because they chose to stand by each other. The city was quiet under the soft glow of dawn, the floating towers bathed in golden light. Marcus and Ilara stood atop the highest balcony, overlooking the city they both called home, though from very different worlds. The Festival of Bonds had ended, the crowd had gone, and only the gentle wind carried whispers of the night before. For the first time in weeks there was silence, not the tense, uneasy kind, but a calm, steady peace. Ilara turned to Marcus, her eyes reflecting the morning sun. "You could have left," she said softly, "any time you wanted. But you stayed." Marcus looked down at her, his expression steady and honest. "I stayed because I chose to. Not because your father commanded it, not because of rules or expectations. I stayed because I wanted to be here with you." Her heart fluttered. She had grown used to human words that were careful, diplomatic, or calculated. But these words carried truth, quiet and unwavering. In them, she felt courage not just in action, but in heart. She had been raised to respect duty above all else, but now she realized that some choices were stronger than any law or decree. Some choices were made by the heart. Ilara reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of trust, understanding, and the bond that had formed between them. Marcus squeezed her hand in return, steady, grounding, a silent promise that he would always stand by her. King Thalric, who had observed their growth from a distance, entered the balcony quietly. There was no anger in his eyes, only a thoughtful calm. "Marcus," he said, voice measured, "you have not only saved my daughter, but you have shown courage, honor, and loyalty that surpasses any expectation. I commanded the bond, yet I see now that your choice is your own. And in that, I find pride." Marcus bowed his head, feeling respect and relief. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said. "I will continue to stand by Princess Ilara, By choice, not by command. The king nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at the princess. "Elara," he said, "you have chosen wisely. Courage is not measured in birthright, but in action and heart. You have found someone who honors both." Elara felt warmth spread through her chest. She looked at Marcus again, seeing the human not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged not by law, but by choice, by bravery, by loyalty, and by heart. For the first time, the word betrothal no longer felt like a duty forced upon them. It was a bond chosen freely, a connection that had grown from trust and courage. She realized that Marcus had become more than a protector. He had become her companion, her equal, and perhaps in time, something deeper than either had expected. The wind carried the distant songs of the city waking, lanterns still floating softly on the morning breeze. Marcus and Elara stood side by side, two very different worlds connected by acts of courage, moments of trust, and the quiet decision to stand together. The sun rose higher, bathing them in warmth, and for a moment, everything else, the palace politics, the whispers, the dangers faded away. "I never imagined this," Elara said, voice barely a whisper. "That someone so human could mean so much." Marcus smiled, a small, honest smile that reached his eyes. "And I never imagined I would find a place where I truly belong," he said. "But here I am with you." In that quiet morning, amidst golden light and floating towers, a bond was sealed not by command, but by courage, honesty, and choice. The princess and the human, once strangers from different worlds, now faced the future together. Whatever storms came next, be they wind, danger, or challenges of the heart, they would meet them side by side. For in that choice, that simple, profound choice, lay the truest strength of all, humanity. And so, a story that began with fear and danger ended with trust, courage, and the quiet, unshakable triumph of two hearts choosing each other. The world watched, and perhaps, in some small way, it learned that true strength is not measured by birth or rank, but by the courage to act, and the wisdom to choose love.